your face off, ranking off, faking soft porn. I hate all of you. Punch you in the face, now you able to taste barbecue. Hard to do this. I'm doing me.
It's very important to understand that in lynching an individual, their goal was to intimidate the whole mass. That is what terrorism is. And to a very large extent, they succeeded, because while slavery was abolished, the complete subordination of African Americans continued. Unable to vote, unable to get decent jobs, unable to have education, unable to have health care. It was a very successful campaign by a small terrorist organization.
There's a reason why we're dissecting the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy as a whole, because the two are pretty much mutually exclusive at this point. The Ku Klux Klan, white supremacy, white hatred, it's all the same thing. This woman said a small group of individuals. Look at these photos. Look at these images. Do these look like small groups of fucking people? Look at how many people are attending these lynchings. Look at how many people are there to witness this. 5,000 see a double hanging. Make it a picnic. Small groups of people, no. White people in general, in large, were participating in lynchings. Even if they weren't pulling the rope, they were there to watch the spectacle and, oh yeah, take souvenirs as well.
The Klan and its so-called men of justice began to get a reputation. Groups sprung up across the South, and recruitment exploded. The Klan still needed a charismatic leader to lead the fight. For the role, they chose a military man, a hero to Southerners from the War of Secession, General Nathan Bedford Forrest. They come together, they said, okay, who's going to be our leader? And they took a vote, and they all voted for who they thought should be a leader. Nathan Bedford Forrest got the most votes, and they come to him and they're like, hey, we started this thing, it's called the Ku Klux Klan, or the Ku Klux, and we made you our leader. Nathan Bedford Forrest didn't even realize that he was voted as he wasn't even in the KKK.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was a romantic figure. He was a celebrity. He was just kind of known as kind of like a man who's going to do what needs to be done, right? So he was sort of, he had that reputation, and he was happy to have his face put on it. He clearly indicated that he was the head of the Klan.
For a group as violent as the Klan, Forrest was an ideal leader. His reputation preceded him. A former slave trader, he had committed a number of war crimes during the war.
During the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest presided over the massacre of 300 to 400 black men who were surrendering. They were actually Yankee troops. They were surrendering to Forrest's troops, but Forrest allowed his troops to run rampage and, in fact, encouraged them to and murder all of these people. I think that really tells you what the Klan was all about. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a slave trader, a war criminal, and the first leader of the National Klan at its most violent moment.
With Forrest in the lead, the Klansmen began to take more punitive action. The violence reached its peak in 1868. With the presidential elections approaching, dozens of courthouses, churches, and polling places went up in smoke. More than 1,000 murders were committed in 4 weeks. Former slaves could not be allowed in any case to exercise their rights. Doing so would upset the system of white dominance. The victims were not chosen randomly.
He was promoted to brigadier general, and at the close of the year, made himself a thorn in the side of Grant's Vicksburg campaign, disrupting his lines of communication and attacking his supply depots. During a skirmish at Parker's Crossroads on New Year's Eve, Forrest and his men were totally surprised when a Union force suddenly appeared in their rear and threatened to surround them. "Quote unquote, charge them both ways," Forrest famously ordered. They did, and were able to escape the trap and to fight another day. Constantly on the move, bold on the attack, and swift in retreat, no Union commander was able to effectively come to grips with Forrest's cavalry during the war. In September, they took part in the Great Battle of the Western Theater, Chickamauga. Forrest's men pursued the retreating Union army into Chattanooga and took hundreds of prisoners. In December 1863, he was again promoted to Major General. The following spring, in April 1864, Forrest and his men were involved in one of the most controversial episodes of the Civil War. Now, this one, I believe, is one of the reasons why they chose him to be the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. After surrounding Fort Pillow near Memphis, Forrest demanded the surrender of the garrison, which included 262 soldiers of the U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. When the Union forces refused, Forrest's men easily overran the fort. Then, according to several eyewitness accounts, the Confederates, enraged by the sight of black men in federal uniform, executed many of the colored troops after they had surrendered, an unambiguous war crime. Though accounts varied, the incident stands as one of the most gruesome of the Civil War era. "Quote unquote, remember Fort Pillow" became a rallying cry for African American soldiers throughout the Union Army. Later in the summer, Forrest won one of his greatest victories at Bryce's Crossroads, defeating a force twice the size of his own. His legend was constantly growing. That year, General William Tecumseh Sherman declared, "Quote unquote, that devil Forrest must be hunted down and killed if it costs 10,000 lives and bankrupts the federal treasury." Forrest continued to torment the Union High Command as the war entered its fourth year. In February 1865, Forrest was again promoted to Lieutenant General, becoming the only man on either side to rise so far. When Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant in April, Forrest surrendered as well, declaring that, quote unquote, any man who is in favor of a further prosecution of this war is a fit subject for a lunatic asylum. Over the course of the conflict, Forrest had given as much as probably any man for the cause. He had 29 horses shot from under him, killed or seriously wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, and had been himself wounded 4 times. As I stated, we are going to dissect the history of the Klan and expose and shed some light on some of the things that you are not taught in history or in school about these people. Nathan Bedford Forrest, some of you may know about him, but so many other people don't know why and how he was selected as the first national leader / Grand Wizard of the Klan, because he was a bloodthirsty sociopath. And now you understand where a lot of their ideology and thirst for killing black people comes from. This douchebag.
With Forrest in the lead, the Klansmen began to take more punitive action. The violence reached its peak in 1868. With the presidential elections approaching, dozens of courthouses, churches, and polling places went up in smoke. More than 1,000 murders were committed in 4 weeks. Former slaves could not be allowed in any case to exercise their rights. Doing so would upset the system of white dominance.
Former slaves could not be allowed to exercise their rights. It would upset the system of white dominance. And I think that was stated just fine. Because when you look at, especially the last photo before this one, what do you see? You see random white people standing around the body of a dead black person. They didn't have on a Klan hood. They didn't have on a mask. They weren't trying to hide their identity. They were just regular, quote unquote, regular white citizens. And that's where the Klan got their power from, because the white populace put a battery in their back. They cheered on the actions of the Klan. They believed the same thing the Klans did, which is why The Klan is made up of white people. They come from those same communities. They go to those schools. They attend those churches. They are the politicians. They are the law enforcement. You understand? See, they put on the hoods and masks to cover their identity. So when they took them off, you don't know that they're the white person sitting next to you at work, eating a ham sandwich at lunchtime, shooting the shit, talking about the weather or whatever. This is what I believe one of the actual purposes it evolved into, so far as them wearing the hoods, so that you would not know who and what they are, so that they can give you that cheesy ass white people smile when they're in your face, like they're your friend trying to psychologically disarm you, but deep down they hate you. Isn't it Dr. Frances Cress Welsing that said when she was talking to a white colleague that all white people talk about when they are in groups together with no other black people around is us? They are the Klan and the Klan is them. That's why I make the quote unquote Klan synonymous with white supremacy, period. Because find me a white person who does not believe in white privilege, and I will show you a white supremacist.
The victims were not chosen randomly.
The main thing that the first Klan was trying to accomplish was the deactivation, the politicide of African Americans within the South. So, they particularly targeted African Americans who voted. They even more so targeted African Americans who held office. And in many cases, they didn't go to the African Americans who held office in order to say, you need to resign your office or we're going to be back. They went in and they killed them outright, because they understood that these were people that were already established as leaders. They understood that these were people that others in the community looked to as individuals who could kind of exemplify what it meant to assert oneself as a citizen within the society. And those people needed to be neutralized.
Some people may ask, how could the society, the government, allow these atrocities to happen? Well, it's simple. You see, white hatred, white supremacy, white dominance over everyone else is a part of white culture. The KKK is white supremacy, aka meaning it is a part of white culture. And this is how they allow it to happen, because it is who they are. It is what they are at their core. And this reading from Dr. Claude Anderson, I hope, should shed some light on some of the finer points. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was specifically designed to grant suffrage rights to black people. The amendment stipulated that the rights of blacks to vote, quote, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, end quote. Blacks assumed that this new law meant that as newly freed slaves, they would have unrestricted opportunities to vote, run for public office, and politically exercise an interest in addressing the needs and aspirations of their own people. The radical Republicans, who were the congressional liberals in those days, enacted the laws that freed blacks and gave them voting rights. However, white conservative political forces still needed a subordinate black labor and consumer class. Southern whites were unwilling to relinquish control of blacks who were anxious to enter electoral politics. Blacks got their chance in the late 1860s after the Civil War, when Southern states had to comply with the Reconstruction Act of 1867. This act required every former Confederate Southern state to host a constitutional convention and to craft a state constitution before it could rejoin the United States of America. To ensure that the new state constitutions contained all of the post-Civil War constitutional amendments and the 1866 Civil Rights Law, radical Republicans used their congressional powers to push both Republicans and blacks to attend the Southern Constitutional Conventions and actively participate in the planning sessions. In South Carolina, which was one of the most conservative Southern states, blacks not only attended and participated in the committees, they constituted the majority of those attending South Carolina's Constitutional Convention. The participation of blacks in the state conventions frightened white conservatives, who were already concerned that radical Republicans were giving blacks entree to government employment by appointing them to low-level jobs such as clerks, postmen, sheriffs, and school employees at the federal, city, and county level. There was an even greater concern about blacks seeking high-level state and federal elected positions. Conservative Southerners contrived a plan that enabled them to neutralize blacks' newly acquired political power and simultaneously conserve employment, income, and power opportunities for white. With the legal controls of slavery gone, conservatives instituted numerous formal and informal codes of behavior to protect the group-based interests of whites in maintaining the racial status quo. Conservatives established political codes of conduct, many unwritten, that they imposed on blacks seeking to be elected or appointed to public office. Some states did formalize their political codes of conduct into laws. Whether written or unwritten, those codes have stood as sacred understandings between blacks and whites for centuries, and endured until the present time, especially in southern states. These codes plainly told blacks the political behaviors from them that whites would consider inappropriate and unacceptable. The three primary elements of the code of conduct ground rules for blacks seeking public office were: 1. Blacks in high public office could not use their position to publicly encourage, support, or direct cause to alter black economic conditions. Sound familiar? 2. Blacks in high public office could not encourage black people to act as a unified group. Sound even more familiar? And 3. Blacks in high public office could not advocate holding whites accountable for slavery or ill treatment. The participants of the Southern behavior codes and what whites expected of blacks were conveyed through person-to-person contacts, written media, and by public proclamation of legal and extra-legal organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan and White Citizens Council, which means average, everyday white people, my emphasis. When Reconstruction ended in the mid-1870s, the radical Republicans abandoned blacks and withdrew back to the North. The unofficial code of conduct for blacks in elected politics is visible today in the behavior of black politicians who try to take race out of race matters or try to avoid involvement in the topic altogether. This behavior management tool imposed on blacks has been in place for 150 years, but does not apply to other racial, ethnic, religious, or gender groups of people. It applies only to blacks. It is inconceivable that white, Asian, Native American, or Jewish elected officials would be instructed to avoid taking public positions on issues of importance to their specific group. Fearing the consequences of breaking the code of conduct, black elected officials today still shy away from using their office or a public platform to address and remove the historical barriers that prevent their people from being self-sufficient and competitive. Expectations of the political code of conduct have become so ingrained in blacks in general and black voters in particular that they do not even expect leadership or material support from blacks in high levels of government or corporate America. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that white people as a whole in America were white supremacists and racist towards black people. They only wanted us to be free so that we could participate in the electoral process and actually work in their factories and their companies, basically be the slave labor all over again, just in a larger fashion via the entire country. But they did not fight or care for us to be equal to them, which is why to this day our failures are the measuring stick at which they gauge their success. The worse we're doing, the better they feel that they are doing, and vice versa. White people as a whole, as a group, are white supremacist terrorists who do not like black people. Let's be clear. Whether you call them neo-Nazis, fascists, nationalists, Ku Klux Klan. It's all white supremacy. And that level of hatred and evil, that is their culture. This is what they have given to the world, a culture of hatred and evil. Never forget that. That is their culture. Wherever they are on the planet, white supremacist ideology will be present, and it will never leave the planet until they are no longer on the planet. And in case anybody doubts or think that I'm going to run away from what I say, I stand by what I say 1000%. White supremacy, white culture is evil and hate-filled, and that is what they give to the world. Period.
The Reconstruction-era Klan was also happy to target white Republicans, those that they saw as acting in the political interests that would further African-American power.
And so this reminds us again that what we're talking about here is not only disorganized violence, it's not only depravity, it's not only terrorism, it's politics.
In Washington, plans were made to take down the Invisible Empire, whatever it took. Congress adopted a series of laws to dismantle the Klan. Martial law was declared. The Federal Army, still deployed in the South, was mobilized to fight the Klan in order to protect black voters. Slowly, the clampdown began to take effect. In 1872, the Klan was officially declared destroyed. But it was too late. White supremacists didn't need them anymore.
Broke with the jaw, a crook with the cash. Be hoping to God I don't put my foot in your ass. It's nothing personal. You send a verse to me, I send a verse to you. Clearly it's that. Really you act, I'm actually one of them clappers that actually strap. I'm actually smacking the nap off your faculty, jack. Exploiting the black nigga nap Cadillac rap. Fake fuck, I will fuck up your face. Fuck face singing, fuck trigger, nigga the 8.